All right, guys, my name is Scott Webb, and this is going to be the Major League Baseball early season wagering edition video. I just wanted to make sure that we went over some of these topics just because it just helps, especially when you're talking about the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks of the season. I'm wearing my East Coast Sports Investors outfit today. I just want to make sure we get a plug in for them. I do work for them, and you will see them in a lot of things that I do, and you will also see those guys as part of the website that I'm on, and they'll be contributing in some of the stuff that I do. And we're going to try to do some more videos together and stuff like that this season. So I wanted to make sure that, and even the hat there, I wanted to make sure that everybody was very much aware. I'm not wearing my jacket, my sport coat today. All right, anyway, that all being said, I've got 8 different things I wanted to go over, so let's see if we can do that relatively quickly so this doesn't become some hour-long show. But the reality is that the course of a season, you're going to have hundreds of bets. Last year I made over 300 bets, maybe 400 bets. So, you're going to be no need to rush out the first week and go broke. So what I always try to teach people is the first week or the second week of the season, make sure you're making good value wagers, but limit the volume of your unit size. So in other words, if you're using $100, for example, as a unit, and in your first week, or maybe even go into the second week, cut that in half. Use your volume size as a $50 wager. The point being here is, everybody thinks that they've done some great analysis over the off season, including myself, and we think we know what's going to happen, and we think we know how good teams are. But until they actually go out on the field and do the things that teams either do or don't do, you can get yourself caught in the first 2 weeks and lose quite a bit of your year bankroll just in the first 2 weeks because you're playing still lots of games. And we're going off of the ideas that we came up with when they weren't playing. So step number 1 is make sure that you don't lose your bankroll in the first 2 weeks of the season. Obviously, we're going to try to win during that time frame, but if we're in error, we have to make adjustments. And you don't want to make adjustments with a down bankroll. So that's number 1. Number 2 is this is the time where you want to make sure that you set your wager line range, and then you want to stick to it for most of the season. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to be betting, if we're betting sides, we're going to be betting money lines. So we're going to be betting minus, 130 or whatever, and plus 110 or whatever as a money line. But you want to set your range. And this is where you don't want to go above it or below it, and this is why. So my range typically is anywhere from minus 140 to at most minus 150. I may play minus 155 once or twice in a whole season. And the plus side is I usually don't go past plus 135. Now, the reason for these things is you need to take those numbers, turn them into win probability percentages. So if you're minus 150, for example, that converts to a probability rating of 60%. So that team at minus 150 theoretically is going to win 60% of the time. You as a bettor, you have to win at least 60% of the time to be even. But that's not really true because in baseball, unlike football, your handicapping bookmaker juice, the vigorish, is higher. It's not always 10%. In a lot of cases, it's 15%. So if you're going to lose in those scenarios, then you're going to have to try to figure out how to overcome 60% plus that 10 or 15 extra percent in vigorish. So you don't want to play minus 150 all the time because that's just way too line and it's way too high and it's not the right strategy. If you win 56, 57% of your bets in the course of a season, you should make money. and you should make plenty of money. So how do you do that? Well, you do that by staying within your set of money line range. For me, I just told you it's minus 140. I will do 145. Very rarely do I do 155, and I do 150 once in a while. And I think that that's okay as long as you don't do them on a very regular basis, because when you're doing them on a regular basis, that means your win percentage has to be higher to make money. So we want to limit that, and you want to play underdogs. You know, the underdogs affects that too, so it balances them all out. So that's step one and step two, right? So step one, don't go broke in the first 2 weeks. Step two, make sure that you are establishing your range of money line wagers that you want to make. And then step three, this is where we start getting into a little bit of the handicapping part of it. It is going to be watch for cold weather. Now, we're not going to have that throughout the entire season. And when I say cold weather, we're looking for games that are 49 degrees or lower. And then there's two different partitions here, 49 to 40, and then 39 and lower. The reason being is that the baseball doesn't travel well in cold weather. The players don't feel good in cold weather. They don't play as well in cold weather. So run scoring is harder to come by in cold weather. So we won't get a whole lot of these opportunities. Now, we did last year, but we won't get a whole lot of these opportunities this year. I shouldn't say this year, in the whole season. And that's because, you know, over the course of a season, it gets to be 90 degrees in Texas. And that's when you want to look at it on a different perspective. So in the middle of the season, you want to look for those 90 degree or above games because the ball flies out. So we're looking at totals and things that way. But we're not just going to look at cold weather as the main factor. We're going to try to tie that into two other things. We're going to try to tie that into the wind, and if the wind is helping or hurting. Because if the wind is helping and the ball can be pushed out by the wind, then the offset of the cold weather doesn't necessarily help us that much. But if the wind is coming in and it's a cold day, and say, for example, we have a pitching matchup that we like, we're probably looking at a pretty good under there. So that only happens in the beginning part of the season in the, in the East Coast, the Midwest, where those teams are playing when it's cold outside. So I would tell you that you have those opportunities to keep an eye on early, which you don't get in the middle of the season or late in the season. You got to be aware of streaks, and especially at the beginning part of a season. You get teams that come out hot. You also get teams that come out cold. Every year you get the, hey, this team's won 6 in a row. The record is 10 in a row or 12 in a row or whatever. And are they going to get to that point? Well, what you want to do is you want to look at that from a perspective of winning and losing, because teams do lose lots of games in a row right out of the gate. And you want to ride those streaks. So we want to find them and get on them early, not late. Because if you're on them late, then the market has caught up to it. So if you have a team that's won 6 or 7 or 8 games in a row, the bookmaker knows they've won 6 or 7 or 8 games in a row, and they're going to start pricing those lines higher and higher and higher. So if you wanted to get on them because they're hot, you're going to be paying a premium that you probably shouldn't be paying. And the vice versa, that's the same way too. If there's a team that's lost 6 or 7 or 8 games in a row, then they're going to be harder to try to bet on, because the bookmaker makes those lines tougher on you to make them. So we want to try to look at games that start off in the 3 range, right? So if a team's won 3 straight games or they've lost 3 straight games, that's when you might find a little bit of value on them before the market has caught up to them. And then you just kind of keep looking at them. If they've won 3, then they win the 4th one, then they win the 5th one, the 6th one, the 7th one. You're making some money, right? And the same way applies if they're losing. So if they've lost 3 straight games, then the 4th one, the 5th one, the 6th one. And there's that old adage that people always talk about. Well, if they've lost 3 games in a row, they have to win 1 at some point in time. And that's true. They'll win 1 at some point in time because they play 162 games. That doesn't mean they're going to win the 4th game or the 5th game or the 6th game. because baseball is a game of streaks, and most teams are going to have streaks of 6s and 7s and 8s in the season very commonly. It doesn't mean that they're going to be doing it every month, but it does happen on a regular basis that somebody is winning 5, 6, 7, 8 games in a row or losing 5, 6, 7, 8 games in a row. And as bettors, we need to know that information, and we need to be following those streaks, not trying to bet against that streak to end. It will end on its own at some point in time. It's not our job to predict when. It's our job to make the money off of the streak that's happening. So that's 4 things already, right? So we talked about don't go broke. We talked about your range of money line that you want to bet. We talked about cold weather, and now we just talked about the team streaks. And then the other one, this is going to take a little bit of practice, but starting pitchers, when they start the season, they go through a series that I call creating their mean average. In other words, in 3 starts, they're going to establish sort of where they are for the whole season, and that sets the bar, and then they're either going to start raising the bar or lowering the bar, or they're going to kind of have an average throughout the season for that. And I get those numbers from game score results from pitchers, and your average pitcher's game score results of 50 or 51. And a lot of times what will happen is a pitcher will go out his first start and he doesn't do very well, and he throws, say, a game score of 40, which is not very good. But the I shouldn't say law of averages, but the mean average, if he's going to be a standard average pitcher in Major League Baseball, it's going to be a 50 or 51. So if he started at a 40, his next start, or possibly the one after, but primarily the next start, he's going to throw a better game so that his mean average gets to that 50 number. And that's how you can kind of predict where guys are going to go. So, and the vice versa, that happens too. Say a guy goes out and throws a game score 65, which is a really great number, and then the average is 50, 51, then typically he's going to be throwing a poor game in his next start or two. Our job is to figure out where in that does this pitcher lie. In other words, ace pitchers' game score averages are typically 60 for a whole season. Those guys are phenomenal. And your average guy is at 50, 51. So if you're above average, you're going to be 55, 56, 57, somewhere in there, 58. So we need to know what kind of pitcher we have that we're working with, and what is his normal mean average, and then where is he establishing a new one at. So his first start he goes out, he throws a 40. I'm going to be looking to bet on him his next game, because typically, he's going to throw probably a 60. So his 60 and a 40 makes 100. 100 divided by his 2 starts makes a 50. Now he's an average pitcher. Humans, and that's what we're betting on here. We're betting on humans and human performance. So we're in a position where we are not robots. We can't go out and perform at the max level every single time we go out. It doesn't work that way. So there are ways and means to identify some of these situations, and this is one of them. And at the beginning of the season, every single starter will be trying to establish their mean average, and when they're trying to establish that mean average, we can certainly game 2, game 3, game 4 that those guys are starting, we can certainly get to a point where we can almost predict what kind of an outcome is going to happen for that pitcher. And then that gives us a super edge on figuring out what's going to happen in terms of where we should go with our money and how we should bet. So that's 5 things. 6th, this is one that we have to watch for and know in terms of how markets are moving and how they've reacted. So based on what a perceived sports book looks at, and then based off of reality and or projected numbers, what are we going to try to find? So a sports book typically will move a little slower, meaning that if they are off on a team or they are off on a pitcher, for example, then the market will normalize over the course of time. But we as bettors want to take advantage of that market prior to that normalization or the market's adjusting. And here's a perfect example of that, right? So last year in 2018, the American League Cy Young was the Tampa Rays' Blake Snell. And if you were to think about him being the Cy Young Award winner going into that season, he wouldn't even been on your list. So in early April and in early May, here's some of Blake Snell's lines. Blake Snell was minus 107 at the Chicago White Sox, and the opponent he was facing was Carson Fulmer. And Carson Fulmer's WAR was minus .3 last year. So he was one of the worst pitchers in baseball on one of the worst teams in baseball, and the Rays won 90 games last season, and the Cy Young Award winner was minus 107. So if we would have known that at that moment in time, he would have been that's 100 points off of where that line should be. It should have been minus 200. So the next time out, he faced, and this is at Baltimore. The Rays were at Baltimore and against Dylan Bundy. And remember, right, the Orioles, they didn't win 50 games. He was plus 109 against Dylan Bundy. So that provides a ton of value. So just sort of give you a market perspective, right? In September, Snell was against the Toronto Blue Jays, and he was at home. He was minus 230. And then same month, minus 177 at Toronto, and he was at Texas, and he was also minus 187. So see, that's what I mean by the market shifting and us being able to capitalize. And it's a slower market because those Dylan Bundy numbers were in May. So that's March, April, May. We had 3 months of the Cy Young Award winner that we could be getting at plus value against the Baltimore Orioles, who are the worst team in baseball. So how do you do that? Well, the only way you do that is by understanding what teams are supposed to be doing and what they are doing. Because if we're looking at the Tampa Rays as a 90-game winner, then we're looking at them in a perspective that's correct. And if the sportsbook is looking at them still as making the line of they're not that good and Blake Snell's not the Cy Young Award winner, then you're going to get the plus 109 value, and then we can just hammer those lines. And then those will be the best bets that we make all season. So we can pick some of that stuff out early. We have to try to identify those players and or teams, and we have to try to identify those situations. And when we have those, that's when we want to start going bigger, and we'll also on specific plays. We don't want to go bigger on every play, because ultimately there's 300, 400 bets you're going to make, and it doesn't do you any good because to be continually up and down with your unit size. Because if you lose a big unit game and you don't have another one for say 10 more days, it might take you, 7, 8 straight games just to make up for that big unit game you lost. So keep your units roughly the same, except for on certain situations you want to step out. And like I bet 1 unit a game a lot, and I will step out and bet 2 units. Well, that's double what I normally bet. So if you're a $100 better, then you bet 200. If you're me or somebody else betting $500, $600, $700 a game, then that's a pretty big step out, right? So you're betting $1,000, $1,100, $1,200, $1,400 on that game. So the idea is that you're going to be making so many bets that you keep track of how much money you have out there at any given time and grow your accounts. That's what we're trying to do. So that's 6 different things we talked about. So we got 2 more, right? So the next one is look hard at underdog betting early. And the reason is because we just talked about a sports book moving slowly. The reality is going to be is that at the beginning of the season, your numbers, the actual numbers and the sports book's numbers, they're all going to be the furthest apart, and they will start to normalize and grow together as the season goes on. So the idea here is to work hard at trying to find any kind of value in underdogs you're going to have, because at the beginning of the season, that's when they're going to be the most opportunistic. And as the season kind of moves forward, the normalization of the numbers kind of then take those values that you have at the beginning and shrink them. And so spend time, like if you analyze all 13 games in a day, then you want to go and you want to try to find however many of those games can you bet as an underdog player, and where's my value there. And if you can find it, it's worth trying, especially early. And underdogs, you don't have to win as many. If you're getting plus, results where, you're getting plus 110, plus 120, plus 130, you're only betting $100 to win 130, for example. And, in that particular case, you only have to win, 44% of the time, 45% of the time. So, you don't have to even win half the games to actually make money doing it that way. So there's a lot to be said about those underdogs, especially early. So spend some time trying to find where those values come into play. And the last one here that I tend to watch for, and sort of a handicapping trick too, is starting pitchers at the beginning of the season are going to be limited on their pitch counts. They don't want them to pitch more than 100 pitches very often. Now they'll build them up, so if they pitch 100, then they might go another 100, or they might go 105 or something like that. But if you find a guy that has pitched 100 in his first start, and then he throws 100 in his second start, then he goes out in his third start and it gets extended because he's like in the sixth inning and they're trying to get him through the sixth inning to get it to a relief guy in the seventh, and he throws 115 or 120 pitches. Well, that means that, over the course of the first 4 games, he's had no relief time where he's only thrown 85 or 90 pitches. So typically in his 5th or 6th start, he's going to have sort of a tired arm because it's early in the season and he hasn't been able to recover. So they do need that recovery time in the first month. So watch for those numbers and how many pitches a guy has thrown. So if a guy's extended himself and he's way out there, look for that to be a problematic situation as he goes forward into his 4th, 5th, or 6th start. With the idea being too that you want to, you don't want to make a wager just based on that, but you do want that to tie into other things that may be happening with that scenario that then give you an outlook that says, okay, well, that makes sense. And not only does that make sense, this story is starting to take life. If this particular pitcher is expected to have a poor game because he had a great game last time out and he threw a lot of pitches over his last 3 or 4 starts, and say the bullpen has been used up because the team was trying to win some games, so they used a lot of bullpen guys with the idea that this guy's going to throw another bunch of innings or a bunch of pitches. So then you start to look at it and you go, well, this is a perfect scenario that goes against what the mean is for this pitcher. He hasn't had a break. He's thrown lots of pitches. He has a great start his last time out. He's regression ripe. And let's start looking at the other side a little bit. And if we can paint a picture that the other side has an opportunity for success, then we have to see where the value is and if there's enough value there to bet it. And that's what we would look for when it comes to some of that kind of thing. So we can use a lot of stuff. So let's just recap real quick. I went over 8 things today. This is the early season, Major League Baseball season, kind of talking notes, wagering tips, if you want to call them that. First thing is you're going to have hundreds of bets. Don't go broke in your first week. Second one is to set your wager line, money line range of bets that you're gonna make, and don't change from those. Or if you do change from those, make it an exception. You only do it once a month, or something like that, where you're not doing it that often. Third thing, watch for cold weather. The fourth thing is be aware of streaks and whether teams are hot or cold. Also look for the fifth thing, which being the starting pitchers establishing themselves for the 2019 season and establishing their mean baseline that they're going to be working from. The sixth one is the perceived sportsbook slowness to normalizing markets. We can get ahead of that a little bit. The seventh one is look really hard at underdogs, especially at the beginning of the season. And the last one, the eighth one, is to keep an eye on starting pitching in their pitch counts. All right, guys, again, my name is Scott Webb. I hope you like the show. Again, I am with East Coast Sports Investors. I also have my own website, and I have a free service. I have a paid service. I'm on YouTube. I do Periscope shows. I have Instagram. You can find me in lots of different ways. Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. All that stuff. So be happy to work with you. It'd be great to ask questions to me. I would like to talk baseball with anybody. So let's have a great 2019, guys. Thanks a lot.